I don't quite remember the last time Uncle Harold smiled. Maybe it was that December afternoon when he opened the safe in his bedroom and placed inside a fresh stack of bills he had just withdrawn from the bank. I stood behind him, watching as he gently closed his eyes and took a long breath, as if savoring the scent of a countryside afternoon or the hair of someone he once loved. But no, for him it was the smell of money, the only thing that could lift the corners of his mouth into the faintest trace of a smile. Harold, my maternal aunt's husband, was a man hardened by life. His face stern, brows constantly furrowed with worry. At 65, he no longer worked much, but his eyes were always calculating. The power bill this month, household expenses, the latest interest added to his savings account. Harold's entire life was built on saving, relentless, like a gold miner deep in a mountain shaft. Wait a second. Before we continue with today's story, please take just 3 seconds to hit the subscribe button. That way, it means we're friends now, able to share and listen to each other anytime. Thank you so much. When he was younger, he and his wife Martha took on every kind of job. Cleaning houses, gardening, doing laundry for neighbors, even taking graveyard shifts at Walmart. They didn't waste a single cent. Every dollar was split in two, a small part for food and the rest straight into the safe, which Harold jokingly called my most loyal friend. Everyone in the neighborhood praised them for being hardworking and debt-free. But behind that old wooden door was a world without warmth, a world where money became the measure of every relationship. Ethan, Harold and Martha's only son, grew up in a house where no voice was ever louder than the sound of counting cash. From an early age, Ethan learned to clean, cook, fix leaky faucets, mow the lawn, because his parents were always working. While his peers were off to college, Ethan stayed behind, operating machinery in a small local factory. He was only 18 that year. That was supposed to be a time of dreams, of loud dorm room music and late-night study sessions with friends. But for Ethan, it meant 12-hour shifts, calloused hands from gripping metal, and handing over every bit of his modest pay to his father. One evening, after work, some co-workers invited Ethan to grab a few Bud Lights at a roadside bar. For the first time in over a year, he agreed. They laughed, shared stories. Ethan had just one drink, then stood up to pay, but his wallet was empty. Not because he forgot it, but because he never kept a dime for himself. Embarrassed, he apologized and hurried out, face flushed. That night, Harold was waiting for him in the living room chair. When Ethan walked in, there were no questions, no scolding, just a cold, piercing stare, and then a sudden punch that darkened his vision. Money is for saving, for the future, not for throwing away on booze. Harold growled. Ethan didn't argue. He bowed his head, cheek burning, fists clenched, but didn't say a word. In the thick darkness of that room, only the sound of sharp breathing remained, in the weight of a father's judgment. The years that followed, Ethan grew used to a life with no choices, no personal money, no plans for the future, no dreams, just work and obedience. Sometimes when I visited, I'd find him sitting quietly on the porch, wiping dust off his old motorbike, eyes staring into the distance. The gaze of someone who had misplaced his youth and no longer bothered to look for it. At 25, Ethan married a woman named Lily. Sweet, gentle, a cashier at the local grocery store. The whole town was happy for them. Everyone thought Lily's presence would bring some color to his life, and maybe even to that gray, lifeless house. But what they didn't know was that Lily, too, would be consumed by Harold's shadow, the most powerful, yet loneliest father-in-law I've ever seen. When Lily married into Harold's family, she didn't ask for much. She knew they weren't short on money, so all she wanted was to cook meals with her own hands, care for her husband and children, and live peacefully under one roof. But that house was no place for dreams to live. Tradition was ironclad in Harold's home, and Lily was no exception. From the day she married Ethan, she too had to obey the rules Harold had enforced for decades. Everyone who worked had to hand over their wages to him. At first, Lily agreed without complaint. She told herself this was simply the way her husband's family managed money, the father keeping it safe, so the children wouldn't waste it. Maybe that was why Ethan had turned out so diligent and obedient. She thought, this must just be their way. I'll get used to it. And so, 10 years passed. Ethan and Lily now had 3 children, but the small resentments began piling up, brick by brick. Every time Lily wanted to buy a winter coat for one of the kids, she had to ask Harold for permission. When she wanted to take them to the bookstore, she had to wait until he agreed to open the safe. Her chest grew tighter each day, as though the walls of that house were pressing in on her. The house itself told the same story. A single-floor place at the end of the street, with a sagging roof, peeling walls, and wooden floors that groaned with every step. Each morning, everyone woke at the same time, bumping into one another in the tiny bathroom, grabbing a bite of cold bread before scattering across town for work. And every month, Ethan, Lily, and Martha would lay their pay envelopes on the table for Harold to count and deposit at the bank. No one questioned it. No one dared to keep even $1. One evening, Lily turned to Ethan. "Why can't we keep our own money?" Ethan just looked at her, eyes downcast, like a schoolboy caught unprepared at the blackboard. This is how Dad's always done it. We live together, so the money belongs together. We're not really lacking anything, right? But not lacking anything to Ethan meant only having food on the table and clothes to wear. To Lily, it meant something else. Not enough space for their 3 children to study. Not enough privacy for a husband and wife. Not enough freedom for a woman who worked 8 hours a day. For the children's sake, Lily pleaded with Ethan. They're growing up. They need space to learn, to breathe. It's time we built a bigger house. With the savings Harold had hoarded, they could have built 3 houses. But when Lily and Ethan asked him, he waved it off. Building a house costs a fortune. This one has stood for years, and it'll stand for more. If you want something new, I'll give you a piece of land out back. Build it yourself with your own money. Lily's shoulders slumped. She drew a deep breath, about to argue again, but Ethan stopped her. "Leave it, honey. You heard him. Let's not push." Lily shook her head in frustration and went to their room without another word. Ethan trailed behind, silent. Harold stayed at the table, sipping his tea, eyes narrowed, following them with that cold, measuring stare. The next day, Harold carried on as if nothing had happened. But for Lily, something had changed. She was no longer the soft-spoken, compliant daughter-in-law she had once been. She started coming home later. She blamed overtime, but Ethan knew. She just couldn't bear another dinner under his father's watchful eyes. The table grew quieter with each passing night. Ethan saw the strain on her face, and desperate to ease it, took a new job in the city that paid more. It meant being gone for weeks at a time, only coming home once a month. He thought the extra money would help, maybe even buy his wife a little freedom. But from that moment, Lily's behavior grew stranger. Some nights she didn't come home until morning. Weekends, she was often gone. The children adjusted to her absence, but the laughter in the house slowly faded away. And Harold, though he said nothing, knew it all too well. The house he had once controlled like a machine was beginning to crack, splintering apart one fault line at a time. Things went on like this until one evening at the end of the month. Lily had just been paid, but this time she didn't bring her envelope home and set it on Harold's table like she always did. In fact, she didn't come home at all. When Harold called, she told him flatly she was at her mother's house. In all the years he had ruled that household, nothing like this had ever happened. Refusing to hand over her paycheck was more than just disobedience. It was rebellion. For the first time, Harold felt a knot of panic in his chest. He was angry, yes, but beneath the anger was fear that his own family might finally be turning against him. He couldn't just let it slide. A few days later, Harold decided to follow her. Quietly, he went to Lily's workplace and waited, watching from a distance as her shift ended. That afternoon, he saw her step out through the company gates and climb into the passenger seat of a man's car, a tall stranger with broad shoulders. Harold's stomach dropped. He trailed them. They pulled into a small coffee shop. From across the street, Harold watched them sit close, talking and laughing. And then, as naturally as breathing, she reached across and took the man's hand. Not a nervous touch, not hesitation. The kind of touch born of habit. Harold froze. It felt like someone had sucked the air out of his lungs. For that moment, he wasn't the patriarch. He wasn't the man in control. He was just an old man, standing alone, watching his life slip through his fingers. That night he returned home, but said nothing. He didn't sleep. The next morning, Harold went straight back to Lily's workplace, this time not to watch, but to confront. He waited until he found the man, Jacob, a longtime truck driver at the company. "You know she has a husband," Harold said, his voice low, each word heavy as stone. "She has 3 children, a family." Jacob crossed his arms and shrugged. "She came to me, said she couldn't stand living under her father-in-law, a stingy, controlling old man." Harold staggered as if struck. His hand rose, trembling, ready to slap the young man, but Jacob caught it midair and shoved him back hard against the wall. Pain shot through Harold's body. That afternoon, Harold sat alone for hours in the backyard. The house around him was strangely quiet, as if it too had run out of breath. Martha cooked dinner and called for him again and again. When she finally came outside, she found him still there, sitting motionless under the fading light, his eyes fixed on nothing, one hand clutching a crumpled bank statement. The next day, Harold called both Ethan and Lily into the house. The air inside was thick, heavy, like a storm pressing against the windows. Ethan had no idea what was coming. He thought maybe it was the same old argument about money, about Lily wanting more freedom, about Harold refusing. But what he was about to hear would feel like a gunshot to the head. Harold didn't mince words. Right in front of his son, he turned to Lily and demanded she confess. "You know what you've done. I know everything. Now tell your husband." Ethan looked at his wife, confused, searching her face. Lily didn't flinch. She was different now, harder, colder, as if she'd already made up her mind to leave this family behind. Her voice was steady as she met Harold's gaze. Yes, Father. I'm done with this house. Other families work hard, save their money, and build a good life. But here all you care about is that safe filling up with bills. I've worked like a servant in this house for years, handed over every paycheck. And for what? Just food and clothes. No choices of my own. Even my children, growing up in a house with money, still have less than their friends. She turned then, tears shimmering in her eyes, and looked straight at Ethan. And you're a good son, obedient, hardworking. But as a husband, that's not enough. I'm sorry, Ethan. I want a different life. I want a divorce. Her words hit Ethan like a sledgehammer. He clutched his head, unable to form a response. Before he could speak, Harold barked across the room. Get out. My house has no place for a woman like you. Then, turning to his son, Harold added coldly, She's been with another man. Forget her. I'll find you another wife. It was all too much. Ethan's knees buckled, and he collapsed to the floor. Harold pointed toward the door. Go. Get out. Lily said nothing. She walked into the bedroom, pulled out a suitcase that had already been packed, and wheeled it out without a backward glance. Harold helped his son to his feet. Don't waste tears on her. You'll marry again. But Ethan snapped, the sound of years of pressure breaking loose like a spring. Stop it, Dad. Enough. This is all your fault. Harold's face went crimson. He jabbed a finger toward Ethan's face, stammering with rage. What have I ever done wrong? Ethan wept, too broken to answer. The days that followed blurred together. He didn't go to work. He sat in silence, watching his 3 little children, aching for them, knowing they had no mother now, and still somehow trying to shield them from the truth. But Harold had changed too. The man who had ruled that house like a king was now bitter, seething. Not because Lily had left, but because Ethan, his loyal, obedient son, had dared to raise his voice, dared to blame him. Word of the scandal spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People who once praised Harold for his hard work and wealth now whispered with contempt. Neighbors shook their heads. Friends offered blunt advice, which he brushed off. At home, he felt his son's quiet resentment like a knife. Out on the street, he heard the neighbors' scorn. The weight pressed down on him. Even Martha, his wife, said little now. She didn't have to. Her silence, her downcast eyes, told him everything. She too held him responsible. Harold wandered the yard with his hands clasped behind his back, moving like a ghost. Sometimes he muttered curses loudly enough for the family to hear, trying to remind them he was still the master of the house. But no one listened anymore. His power was gone. His family was broken. And for the first time in his life, Harold had nothing left to control. Then Harold began doing things no one ever expected. The first time, he walked into a pharmacy and bought a packet of sleeping pills. No prescription. No questions. Martha found him after he had swallowed 6 tablets in one sitting. He slept for more than 12 hours straight. She thought he'd had a stroke and called 911 in panic. But he didn't stop there. Back home, he kept looking for ways to end it. Once, he wrapped an electric cord around his ankle and plugged it in. The shock made him convulse violently until the plug ripped free of the wall. He survived again, but the burn scars on his leg would never fade. He told his wife and Ethan flatly, "Everyone blames me for everything. Fine. I'll die, so you can all breathe easier." The words shook them to the core. Ethan was terrified. He couldn't blame his father anymore. There was only fear now, the fear that his dad might leave them at any moment. For the first time, he clutched his father's hand like a child begging, "Dad, if my wife leaves me, I can marry again. But I only have one father. Please don't leave me. Don't do this." Harold said nothing. He just turned away, his eyes red and wet. In the days that followed, he still walked Ethan's children to school. Ethan tried too, taking a local job so he could stay closer to his parents and the kids. For a moment, it looked as though things might settle into something like normal again. Until that afternoon. I was sitting on the porch eating fruit when the phone rang for my mother. On the other end was Martha, her voice frantic, broken. Harold was gone. When I rushed over, the sight froze me. Ethan was holding his father's body, Martha cutting down the rope, laying him gently in the grass beneath the old maple tree. Their cries echoed across the yard. That tree. Every summer, Harold sat there in the early mornings, before the rest of the house woke, before the sun had enough warmth to dry the weight in his chest. Now, he was hanging from it, a rope tied carefully, high and secure. A wooden stool toppled on its side beneath him. No blood, no struggle, just silence, like a ceremony planned down to its last detail. The police came, then the ambulance, but there was nothing left to do. The man who had counted every cent in his family's hands had left without saying goodbye. In his bedroom, Harold had prepared everything. A thick envelope, labeled in his neat handwriting, for funeral expenses. 10 savings books, along with the key to his safe. His funeral was simple, just like the way he had lived. Not many came, but those who did stood quiet for a moment, then whispered among themselves, "Such a shame. All that money, and he never knew how to live. What's the point of saving so much only to suffer like that?" At the funeral, Lily returned. She stood at a distance, head bowed, saying nothing. A few months later, a brand new 3-story house rose beside the old one, which was left standing. Ethan, Lily, their 3 children, and Martha moved into the new place. No one spoke much about Harold anymore, but no one forgot him either. Every morning, Ethan walked past the maple tree and paused for a few seconds. He didn't greet his father. He didn't curse him. He was just a son, trying to understand a father he never truly did. And me, the one telling you this story, I still haven't found the answer. Why would a man with money, with family, with beautiful grandchildren, choose to leave this world that way? There are people who spend their whole lives working, never a day of rest, never a moment with idle hands, saving every dollar for the future. But sometimes, that future turns out to be nothing more than a cold, lonely grave. Uncle Harold was not a poor man. On the contrary, he had savings that many families would envy. But what he lacked was the one thing money can't buy: a true home, a son who could share his burdens, grandchildren who could laugh freely at the dinner table without fearing the sound of his sighs. All his life, Harold believed saving money was the way to protect his family. But he never realized money is meant to serve life, to make it better, not to chain the very people you love. Saving is wise, but saving to the point of suffocating your own life is not. The real lesson is not in the money he left behind. It's in the way he left this world. Harold planned his death with precision, down to the envelope for funeral expenses. But what he could never plan was a place in the hearts of the living. People might remember a strict father. They might respect a frugal provider. But they only truly love the one who lives for others. Not through money, but through understanding, listening, and letting go at the right time. You can stack $1 million in a safe. But if no one in your family wants to sit at the table with you, then you are the poorest person alive. You can control every penny, but if you never hear the cries of those you love, then in the end, you'll count nothing but regrets. And there's no bank in the world that can hold those for you. Harold chose to leave in silence, but his story still echoes, like a warning. Money is a tool, not a crown. Family is a home, not a financial system. And a father is not the man who holds all the money, but the man who holds the hearts of those around him. Whisper of money, one story, one death, one reminder about how we live and the mark we leave behind when we're gone. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If this story touched you, please like, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've ever lived through financial hardship or tragedy, send your story to email of channel, because your story could be a lesson for many others.